A crown did not always arrive as gold and blessing. Sometimes it came as a collar, polished and ceremonial, tightened in public while everyone called it honor. Ophelia Shadowfang had grown up hearing that a Luna was chosen by strength, grace, and loyalty. Yet every lesson in the pack hall carried an unspoken amendment. She would be praised only while she was useful, cherished only while she reflected a male's status. On the night meant to bind her life to her chosen mate, that hidden law stepped into the torchlight and named itself. What shattered was not merely a promise, it was the structure she had arranged her whole future around. The Ravencrest Great Hall blazed with resin torches and polished antler chandeliers, heat pressing against her skin while cold pooled under her ribs. Wolves from 5 allied territories crowded the long room, rank scents layered so thick she could taste iron, cedar oil, wine, and old dominance rituals on her tongue. Ophelia stood barefoot on the moon-sigil dais in silver ceremony cloth, wrists painted with ash lines that marked her as future Luna, while drummers kept the slow heartbeat cadence for vow binding. Alistair Ravencrest faced her in black formal leathers, broad-shouldered and flawless under firelight, every inch the future alpha his council wanted. He had smiled at her an hour earlier in the preparation chamber. He had kissed her knuckles and said, "Stay steady. We will be done soon." She had mistaken calculation for reassurance because she wanted, one last time, to believe she had been chosen for herself. The High Elder lifted the oath blade. "By moon law and blood witness do you, Alistair Ravencrest, seal bond and authority with Ophelia Shadowfang as your Luna?" Silence stretched. Then Alistair laughed once, low and sharp, and turned so his voice carried to the back wall. "No," he said. "I reject Ophelia Shadowfang before oath and witness. I will not breed weakness into Ravencrest. She is barren blood." The room inhaled as one body. Ophelia heard the words land in the crowd like stones dropped into still water, spreading through startled murmurs, then eager ones. Barren blood, barren blood. Some wolves looked away in discomfort. More leaned forward with hungry relief that disgrace had found someone else. Her throat closed. "Alistair," she said, barely recognizing her own voice. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago," he replied. "You mistook tolerance for devotion. I gave you a place beside me until I confirmed what my healers suspected. No viable line signs, no future heirs, no Luna seat." The High Elder lowered his eyes, refusing to intervene. Ophelia searched the row of counselors for a single face that might object, but she found only caution and convenience. Alistair stepped close enough for her to smell juniper on his skin and whispered so softly only she could hear, "Stand straight while you fall. At least leave me that." Then he seized her forearm and turned her toward the assembly. His grip bruised instantly. "Let all packs witness," he said. "Ravencrest rejects defective claim. She leaves this hall unbonded and unmarked." Someone clapped. Another joined. By the time the guards moved toward her, the sound had become a rhythm. Ophelia did not remember descending from the dais. She remembered the stone edge striking her knee when a guard shoved too hard, remembered the silver ceremony cloth tearing at the hem, remembered the hall doors opening to a night wind that smelled of wet pine and hearth smoke, while laughter followed her down the steps. One of Alistair's cousins tossed her cloak after her as if feeding scraps to a kennel dog. She sat in the rain beside the outer wall until the drum stopped and the celebration resumed without her. "I am still here," she thought, palms flat against the mud, rain needling her neck. "I am still breathing. That has to mean something. Stand up. Stand up now. If you curl around this pain, they win twice." By midnight, she had limped to the servants' corridor and hidden in the old linen room, where the air smelled of starch and mouse nests. Her arm throbbed where Alistair had held her. Dark marks were already blooming from wrist to elbow. She pressed the heel of her hand over her mouth to keep quiet when sobs tried to break loose. Every few minutes, footsteps passed outside, voices bright with wine. She looked stunned. Barren blood. He said it in front of everyone. Better now than after sealing. He saved the line. Dawn had barely silvered the slit window when the door opened and 3 women entered without knocking. Matron Elson, who supervised household rituals, Katrin, Alistair's aunt, and a scribe carrying sealed parchment. They stood over Ophelia as if inspecting damaged inventory. Elson spoke first. "You will sign an abdication and departure statement." Ophelia pushed herself upright. "I have already been rejected. What else do you need from me?" "A clean narrative," Katrin said. "You will affirm that you concealed infertility markers, attempted entrapment by ceremony, and accepted release in mercy." "That is a lie." Katrin's smile held no warmth. "Truth is what survives record." The scribe unrolled the document on a storage chest. Red wax gleamed at the bottom beside Alistair's signet. Ophelia read the first lines and went cold. It did more than erase her. It barred her from petitioning any allied tribunal for redress. Elson crouched and gripped Ophelia's chin. "Sign and leave quietly. Refuse, and we file theft charges against your family line holdings. Your late father's land lease disappears by noon." Ophelia jerked away. "You cannot touch those boundaries. They are Moon Registry." Katrin gave a small shrug. "Registry clerks stamp what we place in front of them." When Ophelia stayed silent, Elson struck her, fast and open-handed, enough to sting and ring her ears. "Do not posture. You have no pack, no mate, no witness." The blow clarified everything. Not the cruelty. She had seen cruelty dressed in etiquette her entire life. The clarity came from the parchment itself, where Alistair's signature cut across the page in hard black strokes. He had prepared this before the ceremony. The rejection was not rage, it was architecture. She reached for the quill. Katrin exhaled in satisfaction and nodded to the scribe. Ophelia dipped the tip in ink, lowered it to the line, and then drove the quill through the parchment into the wood beneath. The scribe cried out. Katrin lunged. Ophelia shoved the chest at their knees, snatched the document, and bolted through the door into the corridor. Shouts erupted behind her. "Stop her! Seal the east stair!" Her body moved on instinct through familiar service passages she had known since childhood, down the narrow stair behind the kitchens, past hanging copper pots and startled scullions. A guard grabbed for her hair at the pantry turn. She ducked, lost a fistful anyway, and ran harder. The back courtyard gate stood half open for milk deliveries. She slipped through into the alley as bells began clanging from the watchtower. Rain had started again. Finer now, turning the packed earth to slick clay. Ophelia clutched the torn decree under her cloak and cut across tannery lanes where vats of lye and bark masked scent trails. If they set trackers, she needed confusion fast. She vaulted a drainage ditch, nearly fell, kept going, lungs burning. Behind her, wolves shouted to spread out toward the river road. By first light, she reached the old shrine ridge above town, a crumbling moonstone arch no one tended anymore. She dropped to her knees under the broken lintel and forced herself to think. If she ran north, Ravencrest outriders would catch her at the pass. South meant allied farms loyal to Katrin's cousins. West crossed open heath with no cover. East led to the border towns, crowded and unruly, where pack authority blurred under traitor law. East, then. She tore the ceremony paint from her wrists with wet grass until only raw skin remained. She rubbed mud into the silver fabric and ripped off the moon thread hem that identified rank. At the shrine cistern, she scrubbed her face, watching the water cloud with ash and blood from a split lip. When she rose, she looked less like a nearly crowned Luna and more like any hunted woman with nowhere to return. By sunset, she had crossed the boundary marker at Hollowmere, then kept walking under drizzle and wind until the moon stood high and pale. Her legs shook. Her shoulder ached from where she had slammed into the pantry doorframe. Twice she heard distant howls and flattened herself in ditch reeds until the sound passed. On the second night, she bought bitterroot powder from a roadside herbal peddler, swallowed it dry despite the bitterness clawing her throat, and felt her natural scent go dull and wrong, wrapped in the sharp medicinal edge trackers hated. 2 towns away, in Brackenford's lower market, a healer named Mistress Neve looked up from a mortar and asked no questions beyond the ones that mattered. Can you read dosage marks? Yes. Can you hold your tongue? Yes. Name. Ophelia hesitated only once. Leah, she said. Leah Stone. Mistress Neve studied her bruised cheek, the rain-stiff cloak, the way she held herself ready to run even while standing still. Then she jerked her chin toward the back room. Bed by the stove. Work starts at dawn. No one here asks for stories unless they plan to carry them. When the door closed behind her, Ophelia took the crumpled rejection decree from inside her cloak and smoothed it flat on her knee. The signature remained clear. So did the line that named her unfit before witnesses of 5 territories. She folded it again, smaller this time, and stitched it into the lining of her sleeve with shaking hands. She had lost a name, a home, and the future announced for her since childhood. She had not lost proof. She had not lost voice. And by the time the first gray light slid across the market roofs, she had made one private vow over the hiss of the healer's stove. No one would ever drag her back in chains disguised as tradition. At that same dawn, in the Crown Citadel, bond seers laid a scorched crystal before the Alpha King. During the Ravencrest ceremony, an ancient mate bond signature had ignited and vanished before identity lock. Source: female, unregistered, the chief seer said. The king did not raise his voice. Issue a kingdom-wide search. Every territory gate, every road post. Bring me the woman tied to that signature. By noon, sealed orders rode for all 9 provinces. By dusk, one of those orders was nailed to the cedar post outside Mistress Neve's shop, the royal wax seal still soft where the courier's glove had pressed it into place. The lower market clogged as traders and laborers leaned in to read, rain dripping from awnings, wet wool and horse sweat turning the lane rank. Ophelia kept her head down behind the tincture counter, grinding bark to powder, but every word carried through the open door. Unregistered female, bond signature anomaly. Report immediately to Crown Authority. A second notice went up before the crowd even thinned, this one bearing Ravencrest ink. Wanted for theft of sacred property. Return authorized by pack claim. The crux of it struck her with cold precision. One power wanted to find her as a mystery, the other wanted to drag her back as a lesson. Either way, men would decide what her body meant unless she moved first. Mistress Neve shut the shop door, dropped the crossbar, and turned the sign to closed with a firm flick of her wrist. They are asking who buys bitterroot in bulk, she said, voice low and practical. I told them half this district would rather taste poison than be tracked by in-laws, which made one guard laugh and the other suspicious. Pack your satchel. Ophelia stared at her. You are risking your license. I am old enough to choose my risks. Neve crossed to the shelf, pulled down wrapped bundles, and pushed them into Ophelia's hands. Dried nettle, willow bark, 2 clean bandages, 1 bone needle. Take the East Freight Road until the fork with the split standing stone. Left branch crosses into Thornwood Crownland. Their wardens follow law before rank, most days. Do not use your true name, unless you want it carried by sunrise. Outside, boots pounded past, voices clipped and authoritative. A fist struck the door once, then again. Inspection, a man called. By order of Ravencrest Tribunal. Neve held Ophelia's gaze for one hard beat. Back window, now. The alley behind the shop stank of damp straw and spent yeast, narrow enough that Ophelia's shoulders brushed both walls as she squeezed through. Her ribs hurt with every breath where she had taken a crate edge the week before. She landed in a midden yard, vaulted a broken fence, and joined a line of evening porters heading east with hooded heads and empty eyes. Nobody looked directly at anyone. In border towns, that was mercy. Rain thickened as she left Brackenford's lights behind. Cart ruts filled and overflowed, turning the freight road into slick black ribbon. Bitterroot coated her tongue with medicinal ash. Twice she heard distant howls and kept walking anyway, because stopping meant shaking, and shaking meant memory, and memory still wore Alistair's voice like a blade. Keep moving, keep your chin down. Keep breathing. If they ask, you are Leah Stone, apothecary runner, no pack, no claim. If they smell fear, call it cold. If they reach for your arm, do not freeze this time. You are not a ceremony offering. You are not waiting on a dais for permission to exist. By midnight, the standing stone emerged from mist, split down the center by an old lightning strike. One half painted with raven crest black, the other carved with a thorn crown sigil half hidden by moss. Ophelia touched the carved side with 2 fingers before she could stop herself. The granite was slick and freezing under rain, yet a faint thrum moved through it, almost like a distant heartbeat buried in earth. Crownland began 3 steps later. Exhaustion settled into her bones as a deep tremor, her knees wobbled, her shoulder burned. She kept to the hedgerow until dawn paled the sky, then reached the outer checkpoint of Greyfen, first town under Thornwood authority. The gate was not ornate, only functional timber and iron, but discipline hung there like another wall. Wardens in dark cloaks checked papers in orderly lines, weapons sheathed, voices controlled. No jeering, no casual shoves. A mother with 2 sleepy children stood ahead of her and was waved through with a nod after routine questions. No one grabbed, no one sneered. The contrast hit Ophelia harder than hunger. When her turn came, the warden at the desk looked up, his gaze pausing on the bruise near her temple she had failed to fully hide. Name: Leah Stone. Trade: healer's assistant, temporary. Origin: Brackenford Lower Market. He marked a slate with charcoal, then lifted his chin toward a brazier where steam rose from wet cloaks. Masking agents are prohibited without declaration in royal wards. You smell of bitterroot. Intent? The question was neutral, almost bored, yet fear snapped through her like a taut wire. If she lied badly, she was done. If she told truth, she was done another way. Personal safety, she said carefully. I was followed. His jaw shifted, unreadable. He took a fresh strip of parchment, wrote 3 quick lines, and held out a stamped pass. 3-day transit permit. Renew at inner post or leave Crownland by sunset on 3rd day. If anyone attempts forced claim inside Thornwood boundaries, report to nearest bell tower. We prosecute. He said it as procedure, not promise, but Ophelia nearly staggered from the force of hearing the words aloud. We prosecute. The law is shield, not ornament. Greyfen's central lanes were already alive by late morning, market tents snapping in the wind, copper pans clanging, sheepdogs weaving between boots. Crown riders moved through at intervals in pairs, thorn insignia stitched at the shoulder, scanning faces with methodical focus. Ophelia bought stale bread, swallowed half without tasting it, and rented a corner pallet above a cooper's shed with the last of her small coin. Sleep did not come. Every creak sounded like pursuit. Every hoofbeat sounded like a verdict. By the second evening in Greyfen, the rain returned in hard slanting sheets. She had just finished delivering poultice wraps to a mill foreman when shouting broke from the upper square. A team of carriage horses, slick-backed and white-eyed from thunder, stamped and tossed against their traces near the fountain, handlers trying to calm them, while townsfolk pressed too close under shared awnings. The crowd's fear fed the animals' panic in tight, escalating circles. Ophelia moved on reflex toward the wheelhouse side where space was narrower and a small figure crouched by a rain barrel with hands over his ears, crying from noise more than danger. She knelt, put herself between him and the spinning crowd, and spoke in the tone she used for feverish patients and feral dogs alike. "Look at me. Breathe with me. Slow. Good. Stay right here until I tell you." One horse reared, hooves striking air, and the handlers cursed as leather snapped taut. People scattered into a side lane. Ophelia pushed the child behind the stone trough, rose, and stepped into the alley mouth to cut the angle of the lead pair, palms open, voice low and steady. Then a presence hit the edge of the square like a storm front contained in human shape. Riders in black cloaks surged through the rain first, not chaotic, not theatrical, just precise. They spread with practiced economy, guiding civilians back, clearing lines, taking reins with gloved competence. At their center came a tall man on a dark horse, coat soaked, posture utterly still despite the commotion. Even from 20 paces, authority moved around him like gravity. Ophelia saw his face when he swung down. Hard planes, rain on his lashes, a mouth set in habitual restraint. He turned toward the alley where she stood, and for one suspended second the world narrowed to the line between his gaze and hers. The sound of horses, rain, shouting. All of it receded behind a rushing pulse in her ears. He stopped walking. She forgot to breathe. Something old and vast in her blood recognized him before thought could intervene, and terror rose alongside a fierce, aching pull that made no sense at all. The nearest horse jolted sideways as thunder cracked directly overhead. Its shoulder clipped the alley wall. Stone splintered. A sharp edge sliced Ophelia's palm as she threw up a hand to brace herself, and bright blood struck wet cobblestone. The man in black drew in a sudden, ragged breath that seemed torn from somewhere deeper than lungs. His head snapped toward the scent. The composure she had just witnessed fractured in plain sight. Amber flooded his irises, swift as flame-finding oil. The animal part of her went rigid. Heat pulsed beneath her skin, threading up from sternum to throat in hot, luminous lines. Not pain and not anything she had language for. A current raced down her arms into her shaking fingers, across the cut in her palm, and back through her chest until her heartbeat no longer felt entirely her own. She gripped the alley post to stay upright. No, no, not this. Not another bond written over me. Not another male deciding and everyone calling it destiny. I cannot survive that again. I cannot kneel. I cannot be displayed. Yet why does his scent feel like winter cedar and home fire at once, like a place my bones remember without permission? Why does every scar in me lean toward him while my mind is screaming run? His guard captain said something sharp at his shoulder, but the dark-haired man did not answer. Rain streamed from his jaw as he took one step, then another, as if each required deliberate restraint against an instinct larger than rank. When he reached her, he did not touch. He looked at the blood on the stones, then at the torn skin of her hand, and grief flashed across his face so quickly she almost thought she invented it. He lowered himself to one knee in the rain. Gasps rippled from the square. Wardens froze. Even the horses seemed to still under the handler's hands. He bowed his head and pressed his forehead, reverent and trembling, against the back of her uninjured hand where it clutched the post. "I am Alexander Thornwood," he said, voice roughened by restraint and disbelief, each word chosen with care. "Alpha King by law, yours by bond if you ever choose it. No claim without your word." The lane tipped under her feet. Her throat burned. She should have stepped back. She should have run. Instead, she stood rooted in rain and thunder, locked in his gaze as gold and silver seemed to shimmer at the edge of her sight, thin, bright threads coiling between wrist and heartbeat, undeniable as breath. Somewhere beyond them, the child she had sheltered began to cry again, softer now, and the sound broke the spell just enough for Ophelia to find her voice. "Do not kneel to me in public," she whispered, shaking hard. "They will turn me into a target before dawn." Alexander lifted his head, rein and resolve in equal measure. "Then they will answer to me before dawn." The words landed between them like a vow and a threat braided into one, and Ophelia almost laughed from sheer strain. Men had promised protection before. Men had called control mercy before. Rain ran down her neck, cold enough to bite, while the Alpha King still knelt in the alley mud with his head bowed to her hand as if he understood exactly what public reverence cost a woman with enemies. His guard captain stepped forward, voice low. "Your Majesty, we need movement now. Ravencrest trackers are 2 streets west." Alexander rose in one controlled motion and turned to Ophelia without reaching for her. "Your hand is bleeding. There is a royal infirmary 2 blocks north. You can walk there surrounded or ride with me and leave the square in 30 seconds. Your choice." Choice, not command. She swallowed hard, glanced once toward the child by the trough, and waited until his mother reached him and pulled him close. Only then did she nod. "Ride, but no palace." A flicker of surprise crossed the guard captain's face, then vanished. Alexander only said, "No palace," as if she had confirmed a plan he already preferred. He stripped off one glove and held it out. For pressure. She wrapped it around her cut palm. The leather was warm from his skin. The withdrawal from Grayfin happened with unnerving efficiency. 2 riders screened the rear, 2 the front, and nobody in black thorn livery touched her except to hand her a dry cloak at the gate. Alexander mounted first, then looked down, waiting. Ophelia put her boot in the stirrup and climbed up behind him, stiff with caution, careful not to let her chest rest against his back. The horse surged forward into rain and torchlight, hooves drumming over packed road, the town lanterns shrinking behind them like embers stamped out one by one. She expected questions. Name, lineage, why Ravencrest wanted chains on her. He asked none. When she swayed on the second hour from exhaustion, he slowed the pace without comment and shifted just enough to block the wind from hitting her full force. By the time they passed the 3rd boundary marker, her suspicion and fatigue were grinding against each other like stone. If this is another cage, it is a quieter one, she thought, gripping the saddle seam to keep her hands from shaking. If I sleep, I lose ground. If I trust, I hand him the sharpest knife. Yet he keeps giving me decisions he could have taken. He keeps leaving the door open and waiting to see if I walk through it. Near midnight, the convoy turned off the main road into a cedar grove where frost silvered the ditch grass. Ahead, a manor rose from the trees, all pale stone and dark slate, smaller than a royal estate and older in its bones. Winter roses climbed the eastern wall, thorny and bare this season. No banner flew above the gate. Alexander dismounted and offered his arm only after she was on the ground and steady. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "No court staff, no ceremony officers, 2 household keepers and a physician who knows discretion better than curiosity." Ophelia looked from the shuttered windows to him. "Why bring me here?" "Because the palace has 1,000 eyes and 10,000 opinions." His mouth tightened, almost rueful. "And because I meant what I said. No claim without your word." Inside, warmth struck her face from banked hearths and beeswax lamps. The entry hall held none of the polished intimidation she associated with power. It smelled of cedar smoke, old books, and dried clove hung in bunches over the kitchen arch. A gray-haired woman in plain wool met them with clean linens and took one look at Ophelia's bruises before lowering her gaze in deliberate respect. "Guest room is prepared, sire," she said. "Thank you, Mara." Alexander inclined his head. "No one enters without her request. Not even me." Mara's brows rose a fraction, then she nodded. "Understood." The physician cleaned Ophelia's palm in silence, stitched the deeper cut with fine thread, and wrapped it in soft bandage. Alexander remained by the far window, hands behind his back, watching the sleet gather on the glass. He did not crowd. He did not perform concern. He was simply there, a steady dark presence that made the room feel both safer and more dangerous, because she wanted to lean toward it. When the bandage was tied, Mara led Ophelia down a narrow corridor to a room with a low bed and a cast-iron stove murmuring in the corner. A folded nightdress lay at the foot of the mattress. So did a small knife in plain reach on the bedside table. Ophelia stared at it. Mara followed her gaze and gave a tiny, practical shrug. "He asked me to place it where you could see it." That almost undid her. She waited until the door closed, then checked the window latch, the wardrobe interior, the hearth recess. Habit. Survival. No hidden observer. No second exit. No ceremonial chains waiting under velvet. Only quiet. Only a room made for sleep. She still slept in fragments. Nightmares dragged her back to the Ravencrest dais, torches flaring, Alistair's voice slicing through drums. Barren blood, defective claim. In the dream she tried to speak and tasted ink, parchment forced against her hand, while laughter rose like floodwater. She jerked awake with a strangled breath, pulse hammering, skin cold despite the stove heat. A sound came from the corridor outside her door, low and rhythmic, not human footsteps, but the soft scrape of weight shifting over old boards. She slid from bed, knife in hand, and eased the door open one finger's width. A massive black wolf lay across the threshold, chin on crossed forepaws, ears lifting at the movement. Moonlight from the end window silvered the thick fur along his shoulders. He did not rise. He did not push inside. Amber watched her from a face built for power and restraint, and she knew without needing scent or reason that this was him. Guarding. Not entering. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She closed the door again, set the knife back on the table, and sat on the edge of the bed until her breathing steadied. The scrape outside resumed, a patient cadence, a living promise that no one would cross that hall without waking him first. She slept the rest of the night. At dawn, she woke to pale light and the smell of cloves. For one suspended second, she did not remember where she was, and panic reached for her ribs. Then she saw the folded spare cloak on the chair, the stitched bandage on her hand, the knife still untouched by her pillow. A knock came, light and unforced. She opened the door to find Alexander in human form, hair still damp from the wash basin, a steaming cup in each hand. No crown, no formal coat, only dark shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm where faint old scar lines crossed his skin like pale lightning. "Clove tea," he said. "Mara said it helps after shock." He set one cup on the table and stepped back toward the hall wall, giving her space. "You cried out twice around the fourth bell. I stayed in the corridor so you would not wake alone." Ophelia wrapped both hands around the hot ceramic, letting the heat bite into her palms. "You could have asked questions while I was half asleep." "Yes." His voice held no pride, only fact. "I could have done many useful things you did not consent to." She looked up sharply. He met her gaze, then glanced down the corridor as if choosing words that did not bruise. "Control kept me alive in a court built on leverage," he said. "When I was younger, I mistook obedience for loyalty and paid for it in graves." A muscle flexed in his jaw. "Betrayal hollowed this kingdom in places no map shows. I do not intend to make your body another battlefield, because fate handed me a bond." The quiet in the room deepened. Ophelia took a sip, cinnamon and clove and bitter tea anchoring her to the present. "What do you want from me?" she asked, if not immediate claiming, not public display, not palace theater. His answer came without hesitation. "Time, truth, and the chance to prove I can stand beside you without taking you over." Her laugh was brief and frayed. "That sounds like something men say right before they do the opposite." "Then test me," he said, "publicly, privately, in law and in silence. Keep every knife within reach until you decide otherwise." He left her with the tea and no demand for response. When the door shut, Ophelia sat very still, listening to his steps retreat down the corridor, each one measured and unhurried. Before noon, while frost still edged the manor windows and meltwater tapped from the eaves, a sealed summons arrived from the Crown Council demanding her presence at first bell hearing. The council chamber in Thornwood's lower keep was a circular room of carved oak and old stone, built to make voices carry and excuses die. Nobles lined the benches in layered furs and polished rank pins, their scents braided with judgment and curiosity. At the center stood an oathstone pedestal veined with moon silver, its surface worn smooth by generations of declarations. Ophelia entered in a plain charcoal dress Mara had altered to fit her. No pack insignia, no borrowed ornament. She had expected whispers and got them. She had expected scrutiny and got that too. What she had not expected was Alexander taking his place not on the raised throne seat, but on the floor level beside the oath stone, close enough that she could feel the contained force of him without him touching her once. The first speaker, Lord Perrine of North Vale, smiled as if he were being generous. "Your Majesty, with respect, this matter concerns a discarded stock female and a disputed scent event. We risk inflaming all provincial alphas if we elevate personal impulse over established claim customs." Discarded stock. The phrase struck like old poison, familiar and corrosive. Ophelia felt her spine lock. Across the circle, several nobles nodded, emboldened by the wording. Alexander did not raise his voice. He stepped to the oath stone, drew a short ceremonial blade from the pedestal bracket, and cut his own palm in one clean line. Blood welled dark and immediate. He pressed his hand flat to the silver-veined surface. Light flared under his fingers. "Record this as crown oath," he said, each word ringing through stone and timber. Any insult or dehumanizing designation directed at Ophelia Shadowfang is treason against the dignity of this court and the authority of my crown. First offense, forfeiture of speaking privilege. Second offense, seizure of title pending review. Shock rippled hard enough to silence even the whisperers. He turned to Lord Perrin. "You have one warning. Use her name." Perrin's face blanched. "I withdraw the phrasing." "Noted." Alexander wrapped his bleeding palm in a cloth handed by a clerk, then faced the chamber with the same cold precision he had brought to the square. 3 legal claims are being circulated to justify forced restoration. I will address them now. He lifted one finger. First, that ceremonial rejection preserves male ownership until remarriage. False. Moon Statute 12 defines rejection before sealed vows as full dissolution of personal claim. A second finger. Second, that rejected females are barred from petition. False and selectively quoted. The bar applies only to compensation petitions filed after accepted severance payment. No payment was offered or accepted. A third. Third, that cross-pack tribunals cannot review coercive contracts. False under Crown Compact 9, whenever border enforcement, forged documentation, or public order are implicated. All 3 are implicated. He looked directly at the scribe table. Enter full citations. Distribute copies to every provincial bench by dusk. No one spoke. Then he did something Ophelia had not seen a ruling male do in any hall, ever. He took one measured step back from the stone and angled his body so she stood slightly ahead of him in the center line. Ophelia Shadowfang, he said, formal now, carrying to the far benches. If you accept, I appoint you temporary keeper of petitioners under Crown Seal until full tribunal review. You will draft reforms to exile and restoration law, and you will oversee intake for rejected claim cases beginning this week. A council elder sputtered. Your Majesty, she has no seated rank. Alexander's gaze never left Ophelia. She has standing by injury, evidence, and lived expertise. Rank follows function when the old framework protects abuse. The elder sank back, chastened. Ophelia felt dozens of eyes on her, weighing, doubting, recalculating. Fear pressed at her ribs, but it no longer owned the room. She could refuse and keep hiding. She could accept and step into fire with witnesses. Her fingers tightened around the folded notes she had brought and never expected to use. She lifted her chin. I accept the appointment on one condition, she said, voice steady despite the pulse in her throat. All petitioner interviews are witnessed by 2 scribes and 1 healer. No closed-door adjudication. Granted, Alexander said immediately. Murmurs swelled, this time uneven, uncertain. Not victory, not yet, but movement. When the hearing adjourned, nobles parted for her in narrow, reluctant lanes. Alexander remained 1 step behind as they crossed the chamber, close enough to intervene, far enough not to overshadow. The geometry of it was unmistakable. Strength in service, not possession. At the corridor arch, Ophelia slowed. She could still feel old reflexes clawing for retreat, for mistrust sharpened into armor. They were not gone. They might never fully vanish. Yet when she glanced back, he waited instead of steering, watching her as if her pace set the law between them. For the first time since the dais, she let herself breathe all the way down. Walk with me, she said quietly. His answer was equally quiet. Always, if invited. She did not offer her hand, not yet. But she did not pull away when he matched her stride into the winter light. They crossed the courtyard in step, frost whitening the flagstones and the bare vine trellises, their breath visible in brief, pale clouds. Ophelia kept her attention on the gatehouse arch, on the rhythm of her own boots, on anything except the awareness that tracked his nearness as precisely as a pulse. Halfway to the outer walk, a courier in soaked riding leathers dismounted hard and dropped to 1 knee, fist to chest, a tube of black lacquered parchment raised in both hands. Direct petition for Crown Review, he said, filed at dawn by Alpha Alistair Ravencrest under emergency seal. Alexander took the tube without opening it, then looked to Ophelia first. You should hear it in full. The choice steadied her. Read it. They moved into a side chamber off the courtyard, a narrow records room lined with slate shelves and winter-dry ink pots. Alexander broke the seal. Ravencrest wax cracked in jagged pieces, and a coppery streak marked the fold where someone had dragged a blooded thumb across the margin. He read silently for 3 lines, jaw hardening, then passed the parchment into her hands. Alistair's script was unmistakable, precise, arrogant, built from sharp vertical cuts, as though every sentence were a verdict. He claimed Ophelia had absconded with sacred pack property, cited forged mating contracts bearing fabricated witness marks, and invoked restoration rights to demand immediate return for punitive reunion under tribunal chain. He requested expedited transfer before moonrise, arguing that Crown interference had destabilized regional order. At the bottom, beneath the formal language, 1 line appeared in darker ink, private and vicious. I will finish the wedding properly where all can watch. A cold line traveled from Ophelia's throat to her spine, not surprise, recognition. He had always believed narrative belonged to whoever spoke first and loudest. Alexander's voice dropped. That line was not meant for court record. It was meant for me. She folded the sheet once, precisely. He wants me frightened enough to hide and silent enough to lose by default. A second knock struck the half-open door. Mara entered with a quartermaster in travel cloak and grain dust, both faces tight. The quartermaster bowed quickly, then laid out 2 stamped tallies and a rough map on the nearest table. River granaries at Keldmarch and South Weir were seized at first light by Ravencrest-aligned crews, he said. Locks changed, stores withheld pending tribunal outcome. They claim lawful asset freeze over disputed property routes. His finger traced the river spine on the map. If this holds, 2 provinces lose winter flower inside 10 days. The crux sharpened in Ophelia's mind with brutal clarity. Alistair was not chasing only revenge. He was manufacturing urgency, starving distance out of the legal clock until fear demanded a quick ruling in his favor. As if summoned by that thought, a third report arrived before the ink dried on the seizure ledger. Thorn wardens from the eastern roads brought 3 detained raiders wearing unmarked cloaks over Ravencrest boots, each carrying stolen insignia from Crown patrols. Villages had already begun repeating one rumor: the king could not keep roads safe, and perhaps Ravencrest order should return. The scheme was multifaceted and non-trivial, built to wound court legitimacy and private safety in the same stroke. Ophelia laid both palms on the table, bandaged hand throbbing. He will push for emergency tribunal at the Moon Dais. Public room, packed benches, no time for scrutiny. Alexander's gaze stayed on her, not the map. Then we prepare for public room, packed benches, and scrutiny so sharp it cut stone. She gave him a brittle look. You are very calm for a man being baited into a kingdom fracture. I am not calm, he said. I am contained. For 1 second, despite everything, a laugh escaped her, small and incredulous. It broke the pressure just enough to breathe. The keep's lower bell began tolling first call for petition intake before the echo died. When Ophelia stepped into the records corridor that led toward the keeper's desk, petitioners already lined the stairwell, shawls damp with sleet, documents clutched in chapped hands. She sat with 2 scribes and a healer as required, listening to women describe rejected bonds, confiscated dowries, and contracts they had been told were holy and permanent. She catalogued each claim, stamped each intake, and sent copies to archive vault and tribunal clerk before noon, refusing private interviews no matter who demanded one. Evidence moved in triplicate or not at all. Pressure came from every direction. Noble envoys questioned her authority with polished smiles. Provincial alphas sent formal objections wrapped in courtesy and threat. A council elder requested closed review for efficiency, and she declined on record while the scribe read the refusal back to him line by line. By the time winter light slanted thin and gray through the high slit windows, her shoulders burned, and the old instinct to disappear nipped at her heels like winter dogs. I am tired, and tired is when fear sounds reasonable. I know this pattern. I know the seductive logic of retreat. Be smaller. Be quieter. Survive 1 more day unnoticed. But unnoticed is how they wrote me out the first time. If I step back now, he drags me into that circle under chain and calls it law. I can still feel the dais stone under my bare feet from that night, the crowd waiting for me to collapse in a graceful shape they could applaud. Not again. I am not asking to be believed out of pity. I am building a record no one can burn without witnesses. Keep writing. Keep stamping. Keep your name in the room even when your voice shakes. Alexander appeared at intervals and never interrupted proceedings. He stood by the rear pillar in dark wool and listened as if each petitioner were briefing him on military risk. When one lord attempted to cut in front of a seamstress with a bruised jaw, Alexander directed him to the end of the line without raising his voice. When Ophelia finally stood and swayed from hunger, a tray already waited on the side table. Bread, broth, salted pear, clove tea. No performative tenderness. Competence shaped like care. Night settled hard by the time they returned to the Winter Manor. Sleet hissed against the shutters while she reviewed the Ravencrest contract copies under lamplight. Alexander sat opposite her with legal codices spread open, long fingers turning brittle pages with surprising gentleness for a man who could break a door from its frame. Every time their hands reached the same document, awareness prickled along her skin, immediate and disorienting. Not the coercive pull she feared, not a command, more like a current seeking alignment, asking and waiting. "Look here," he said, tapping a witness sigil. The third mark uses pre-reform crescent orientation. No active clerk would sign this way. She leaned closer, shoulder almost brushing his arm. It is copied from archives older than 20 years. He forged from tradition because he assumed no one checks the details anymore. His mouth curved, brief and fierce. "You check details. You taught me to test every statement against record. You were doing that before me." Heat climbed her throat for reasons that had nothing to do with the stove. She sat back, careful, and returned to the page. Near midnight, a dispatch hawk struck the glass tube at the manor post with enough force to wake the household. The message inside carried Thorn cipher and Road Warden insignia. 3 coordinated wolf raids had hit river carts flying royal pennants, and survivors swore the attackers shouted crown commands in rough imitation. Wardens had captured 1 wounded raider alive. Under healer sedation, he identified payment through a Ravencrest broker and named a meeting point at the abandoned tanneries east of Keld March. Alexander sent the confession to tribunal clerk within the hour, with copy to 6 provincial benches, eliminating any chance of quiet suppression. Gray morning came thin and sharp, and market talk had already turned jagged by the time Ophelia reached the keep again. Some called her a necessary reformer, others called her a spark in dry timber. Children in the lower lanes chanted crude rhymes about chained brides because adults had repeated them too loudly at tavern doors. At the petition desk, a miller's wife gripped Ophelia's sleeve and whispered, "If they can drag you back after all this, what protection do the rest of us have?" Ophelia had no comforting lie to offer. "Then we do not let them drag me back." She worked straight through second bell, then third, the stack of filings rising and falling like tidewater. Between one petition and the next, a runner in tribunal blue arrived breathless with a sealed clerk's notice, wax still warm from the press. It carried what Alistair wanted: an emergency moon tribunal convened for dawn, expedited on grounds of grain instability and regional unrest. Attached to the notice was a provisional restoration writ, narrowly framed but dangerous, authorizing custodial transfer if claimant rights were validated on the dais. The language was procedural, the implications were a noose. Alexander read it once and set it down with deliberate care. "I can stop this with force." "You can stop his body with force," Ophelia said. "Not his narrative, not the law others will reuse when the next woman cannot fight in open court." He held her gaze. "I will not lose you to legality weaponized as ritual." "Then stand with me while I break the weapon." From that moment she moved through preparations like a blade being honed. She selected the original rejection decree from her sleeve lining, now flattened and preserved between waxed sheets. She signed chain of custody before 2 scribes and a healer. She filed the forged contracts with comparative sigil analysis from archive clerks, each page marked and countermarked. She requested oathstone verification protocols in writing and forced the clerk to acknowledge receipt. Every piece of evidence had destination, witness, and duplicate. Nothing remained loose enough to vanish. Dusk bled into iron-blue cloud when she left the keep. Alexander waited at the carriage with no escort fanfare, only 2 shadow guards at distance. He watched her face for 1 heartbeat too long. "You are shaking." "I am angry." "Those can coexist." She almost smiled. "You notice too much." "I notice what matters to me." The silence that followed was dense, not awkward. She looked away first, toward the iron-laced sky, and stepped into the carriage before the bond could make a spectacle of her pulse. At sundown, while the manor staff secured shutters against a hard wind off the river, the antagonist stopped circling and struck directly. A rider wearing neutral gray approached the outer gate with a white tribunal pennant and demanded audience for official delivery. Gate wardens admitted him to the receiving arch under standard rules. He knelt, presented a sealed packet addressed to Ophelia by her appointed title, and asked for acknowledgement signature. Mara called for a scribe. Ophelia stepped into the archway with Alexander 1 pace behind her left shoulder. She broke the seal. Inside lay a narrow strip of linen stiff with dried blood, tied around a child's carved wooden wolf charm from Grayfin's upper square. Beneath it, a note in Alistair's hand. Choose the dais, or I choose where panic spreads next. No names, no locations. Only the charm, unmistakable and intimate as a hand on her throat. Alexander's control thinned to a lethal quiet. Where did you get this? The messenger swallowed. Dropped at South Weir Relay by cloaked riders. I was paid to carry only. Detain him, Alexander ordered. No harm. Full statement, 2 witnesses. Wardens moved. The messenger did not resist. Ophelia stared at the charm in her palm until its carved ears blurred. The child from the rain-soaked square. She remembered his small shaking shoulders, his hands over his ears, his mother's face when she reached him. This was how Alistair worked. Not by direct confession, but by curated terror, enough to suggest reach everywhere and force her choices under emotional duress. A bell began ringing from the western tower, then another farther off, urgent and staggered. A road warden burst through the inner gate, mud to his knees. Fire at South Weir Granary, he called, breath tearing. Set charges on lower beams. Wardens contained half, lost half. Crowd forming at Tribunal Road shouting for immediate transfer ruling. Ravencrest banners in the crowd. Critical velocity arrived all at once. Grain burning, public panic. Threat object in her hand. Emergency tribunal at dawn with a writ designed to chain her if she faltered 1 step. Alexander turned to her, eyes fierce and bright with the predator barely held in check. Say the word and I lock the roads, suspend tribunal and meet him at the river with claws. Ophelia closed her fingers around the little wooden wolf until the edges pressed into her skin. Fear surged, hot and dizzying, but beneath it a steadier force rose, the same iron that had kept her moving through rain with no name and no home. No, she said, voice low and unwavering. At dawn we go to the Moon Tribunal. He wanted a spectacle. He will get one he cannot survive. Alexander's gaze held hers for 1 beat, then turned razor-sharp toward the wardens flooding the archway. Signal every tower from South Weir to Keldmarch. Fire crews first, riot lines second. No live steel unless I give it. He looked back to Ophelia. The charm goes into record now, not rumor. It goes in as coercive evidence, she said, with witness chain. A scribe was already running. Mara pressed a ledger board into Ophelia's hands, and Ophelia signed with a steady script she did not feel in her bones. The blood-stiff linen, the carved wolf charm, the messenger's seal packet. All of it was entered under tribunal inventory with 2 countersignatures, and a healer's notation that the blood on cloth was old, dried, and likely transferred, not taken by fresh injury. The first knot in her chest loosened a fraction. The messenger's statement followed under lamp smoke and sleet hiss. Paid drop at South Weir Relay. 3 cloaked riders. Ravencrest copper mint, clipped edges. No child seen. No direct threat voiced. By the time the 4th bell bled into midnight, a road warden report arrived from Grayfin Upper Square. The same style wooden charm had been stolen from a toy stall crate 2 days earlier during Market Crush, and the child Ophelia had shielded was home with his mother, unhurt. Alistair had manufactured intimacy from theft and timing. She closed her eyes once, brief and hard, then nodded for the report to be copied to tribunal clerk. Dawn came under a low, iron sky. Frost glazed the roadstones leading to the Moon Tribunal, and the old amphitheater was already packed, banners whipping in crosswind, voices colliding in waves that smelled of wet wool, anger, fear, and opportunism. The oath dais stood at center, a ring of silver-veined stone set with 4 rune pillars. Above it, the tribunal moon disk hung pale and unforgiving. Alexander's guard formed a disciplined corridor through the crowd. Ravencrest supporters shouted for restoration rights. Thorn loyalists shouted back about forged raids and burned grain. At the edge of the ring, provincial elders sat in carved benches with tablets ready, pretending neutrality while calculating outcomes. Alistair Ravencrest waited inside the outer circle in formal black, hair tied back, expression polished into injured authority. 2 attendants stood behind him carrying ceremonial chain loops draped over velvet, as if presenting heirloom jewelry instead of custody restraints. When he saw Ophelia step onto the stone, his mouth curved with old contempt, dressed as charm. "Ophelia," he called, projecting to the upper tiers, "you can end this cleanly. Return under lawful restoration, and I will petition mercy over your public misconduct." The crowd roared at the word mercy. Tribunal Clerk Senna struck the staff 3 times. Emergency petition hearing. Claimant, Alistair Ravencrest. Contested subject, Ophelia Shadowfang. Crown interest declared. Her voice cut through wind. Provisional writ allows custodial hold if claimant establishes prior bonded authority. Alistair bowed to the bench. All grace. I submit contracts witnessed and sealed. I submit property flight. I submit destabilization tied to her unlawful concealment. He snapped his fingers. 1 attendant stepped forward and lifted the first chain. Alexander moved half a pace, but Ophelia touched his sleeve once, firm. Not yet. The chain glinted in morning light, every link a memory of the night she had been shoved from the dais. Her pulse hammered behind her eyes. The amphitheater narrowed. Voices blurred. The smell of metal thickened. Do not fold. Not now. I am standing on the same architecture they used to erase me, and my body remembers every humiliation as if it is happening in this breath. Knees weak, throat raw, hands cold. I can let them lock me and spend years unwinding lies, or I can make the lie fail here where everyone is watching. Fear says, survive this hour quietly. Truth says, quiet is how cages become law. Look at the stone. Look at the clerk. Look at the people in these benches who will carry today into every village hearing. If I step back, they call it precedent. If I step forward, they call it audacity. Choose audacity. She walked to the center of the oath ring before anyone granted permission and faced the bench. I invoke Shadowfang ancient right, she said, voice carrying clean. Trial of true scent under Oathstone response. Murmurs shattered into sharp, startled argument. 1 elder rose halfway. That right is archaic and rarely admissible. Still codified, Ophelia answered. Never repealed. Compact 9 cross-references blood truth triggers in contested coercion cases. She turned to Clerk Senna. Read subsection 4. Senna scanned, jaw tightening. Confirmed. Ophelia drew the short blade from the oath bracket, sliced her palm in 1 controlled line, and pressed blood to silver-veined stone. Light flared white gold through the ring seams, climbing the rune pillars in braided threads. Gasps rippled upward through the benches. Let both males stand inside, she said. No proxy speech, no shielded testimony. Alexander stepped in first, expression carved from restraint. Alistair hesitated, then entered with a derisive snort, as if refusing would look weaker than risk. The circle sealed in a low hum that Ophelia felt in her teeth. Evidence first, she said. Her scribes advanced in sequence. Rejection decree, original, preserved from sleeve lining, signatures verified. Forged contracts with archive sigil comparison showing obsolete crescent orientation. Raider confession naming Ravencrest broker. Messenger deposition with clipped mint record. Stolen toy charm report from Greyfen proving intimidation staging. Southweir fire logs with timed diversion pattern. Every item read aloud. Every item marked. Nothing loose. Nothing whispered. Alistair's control thinned at the edges. Paper storms and border gossip. He sneered. You were promised to me. You fled with my property and now hide behind kingly lust. Ophelia unfolded the old decree with both hands and read it into the wind, line by line, her voice steady over each cruelty he had scripted for her burial. The amphitheater went very still. When she finished, she looked directly at him. You rejected me before oath, witness, and moon law. You named me unfit and cast me out. You do not get to resurrect ownership because I survived. Alistair lifted his chin. I denied no coercion because there was none. You stood willingly. You sought elevation and failed. The Oathstone answered before anyone else could. Silver fire licked up from the ring seam, snapped across his forearm, and left a dark, smoking brand in the shape of broken crescent marks. He cursed and staggered, clutching the burn. The crowd erupted. Silence! Clerk Senna shouted, striking staff until the echoes died. Ophelia did not look away from him. Lie again. His breathing turned ragged. You were mine before he scented you. This time the ring flared at his feet, forcing him to his knees with a crack of light and heat. The attendants with chains started forward in panic, then froze as wardens blocked them. Alexander's voice was low and lethal. Stand down. Alistair shoved up with a feral snarl, pain and humiliation shredding whatever courtly skin he had worn. You think law saves you? He spat at Ophelia. Law bends to the hand willing to break it. He lunged. No one had time to shout warning. Ophelia was already moving. She shifted first, faster than the front benches believed she could. Bones and muscle flowing in a single violent grace from woman to wolf and back to partial form in one breath. She caught his wrist before his claws found her throat, twisted under his center line, and drove him down to one knee against the oath seam. Stone rang under impact. He bucked and swung with his free arm. She took the hit on shoulder, held the lock, and drove her forearm across his upper back to pin him harder. Witness this, she said through clenched teeth, breath shaking but voice clear. He attacks in open tribunal after Truthburn. He confirms coercive intent by action. Alistair roared and surged, nearly breaking her hold. Then Alexander let go. The Alpha King's shift detonated through the ring in a sweep of black fur, muscle, and ancient force. His wolf hit Alistair broadside, slammed him against the nearest rune pillar, and held him there as silver shackles ignited from carved channels, snapping around wrists, ankles, and throat in luminous bands keyed to oath breach. Alistair thrashed once, twice, then collapsed to a kneeling bind, chest heaving. Blood at the corner of his mouth, he lifted his head toward Ophelia and rasped, You were mine before he scented you. She stepped closer until he had to look up at her. You discarded me when I was easy to destroy. Now I choose where I belong. Alexander resumed human form with brutal efficiency, one hand still on Alistair's shoulder to keep him down. He faced the bench, and the kingdom watching from stone tiers. Judgment. Clerk Senna stood. By oath response, verified forgery, admitted coercive conduct, orchestrated public destabilization, and assault within tribunal circle, claimant rights are void. An elder added, voice thin with shock, recommend exile under stripped name. Alexander's answer carried to the last row. Alistair Ravencrest is sentenced to permanent exile beyond the Black Straits. Name stripping immediate. Pack mark severed by tribunal right. No territory may harbor him under penalty of crown sanction. The shackles flashed once, searing the raven crest insignia from his wrist in a burst of silver light. He screamed, then sagged, conscious and defeated. Wardens hauled him upright and dragged him toward the lower gate, while the amphitheater watched in stunned silence that slowly broke into a rising, disbelieving roar. Some shouted approval, some shouted outrage. None could claim uncertainty about what had happened on that stone. Ophelia remained at center ring, palms still bleeding, lungs burning, legs unsteady. Alexander turned toward her but stopped a deliberate arm's length away, waiting for invitation even now, even here. Around them, scribes scratched verdict text into permanent record. Chain attendants were disarmed and detained. The forged contracts were sealed for archive prosecution. South Weir relief orders were read from the clerk's stand and dispatched before the crowd had fully dispersed. The narrative had not merely shifted, it had been taken back in her own voice, on his chosen battlefield, before every witness that mattered. Ophelia stood in the center of the oath ring with her blood drying tacky across her palm, while the last of Alistair's shouted protests faded down the lower passage. Wind moved through the amphitheater in hard, cold gusts, lifting cloaks and loose pages at the scribe benches. Alexander stayed exactly where he had stopped, one measured step outside her reach, his breathing still rough from the shift, amber threaded through his irises and held there by effort. Clerk Senna struck the staff once for order. Tribunal judgment stands. Evidence packet is sealed for archive prosecution under Crown and clerk marks. Detainee statements from South Weir Relay, Raider confessions, and Mint records are entered in full. The Grayfin child intimidation object is verified as stolen property, not active hostage material. Messenger will remain protected witness under oath. Ophelia nodded once. The knot between her ribs eased another fraction. No loose ends for rumor to eat. Then she turned to Senna and spoke clearly enough for the upper tiers. Record one more action. I request the claiming here, in this circle, under witness. No private chamber. No coercion hidden by walls. The amphitheater rustled in collective shock. One elder opened his mouth, shut it again when Senna looked at him, then inclined his head. Senna's voice sharpened. Alpha King, do you consent to public bond claim under equal mark protocol? Alexander's gaze never left Ophelia. I consent. Senna looked to Ophelia. Do you consent freely? I do. Then enter the inner ring together. They stepped forward at the same pace until they stood close enough for shared breath. Up close, she saw the tremor he was holding in his jaw, the thin line of strain at his throat, the way his hand stayed open at his side so she would see he was not taking anything. Her fear was still present, not erased, but it no longer ran the room. She placed her unbandaged hand against his chest, felt the hard thud of his heart, and lifted her chin. Say it once more, she whispered, for record and for me. His answer was low and steady. No claim without your word. You have it. The air above the oath stone brightened, silver and gold threading in narrow lines around their wrists. Ophelia reached up, swept her hair over one shoulder, and bared the junction of neck and shoulder with deliberate calm. Gasps rose again from the benches, then dropped into reverent silence. Alexander moved only when she gave a small nod. His hand came to her waist, firm enough to anchor, gentle enough to release if she pulled away. He lowered his head. She felt his breath first, warm against rain-chilled skin, then the precise pressure of teeth finding the mating point below her neck. Pain flashed sharp and clean, a bright arc that made her fingers clutch his sleeve. She did not flinch back. He bit with control, deep enough to mark, then held for one suspended heartbeat while the ring flared around them. Heat poured through her in a sudden rushing wave, not like injury, more like locked doors inside her chest opening one after another. The old humiliation, the nights of hiding behind bitterroot and false names, the dread that every bond meant surrender, all of it met a different force now. recognition without ownership, strength offered instead of imposed. Her knees softened, his arm tightened to hold her upright. The first sting at her neck transformed into a pulsing warmth that spread along her collarbone, down her spine, through her blood. Gold and silver lines leaped from the rune pillars and braided across their joined shadows. The crowd disappeared at the edges of her awareness. She felt Alexander as if the boundary of skin had thinned. His contained fury, his long discipline, his fear of failing her, his fierce and astonished devotion. None of it polished for display. Raw, true. He released the bite and pressed his forehead to hers, breathing hard. A red crescent marked her skin, already sealed with moon-silver sheen. His voice broke on the next word. Mine. She touched the mark, then slid her hand to his jaw and guided him down, not as subject, but as equal. Yours, she answered, and then, with full intention, mate. She turned his head to expose the pulse at his neck. He went still under her hand, surrendering the same vulnerability he had asked of her. Ophelia set her teeth over that racing beat and bit. He shuddered. A hoarse sound tore from him, half pain, half release. She tasted blood, salt, and iron and oath magic, and held long enough to complete the mark before drawing back. A dark crescent rose on his throat, then flashed with silver-gold light and settled. The bond snapped fully into place. It was not a chain. It was a current, a living bridge between two wills. She felt his wolf bow, not in submission to rank, but in recognition, and the fierce part of her that had lived cornered for months lifted its head and finally stood down. The tight knot she had carried behind her ribs since Ravencrest loosened until she could take a complete breath without bracing for impact. Alexander cupped her face with both hands, careful of her cut palm. Yours, he whispered back, voice rough. Mate. They stayed there, foreheads touching, while light wound around their wrists and sank beneath skin in twin crescent sigils. When the glow faded, the marks remained. Crown thorn line at his pulse, moon crescent at hers, mirrored and unmistakable. Around them, the amphitheater exhaled as one body. Some wolves bowed. Some watched with wet eyes and stunned faces, as if they had witnessed not ceremony but a legal paradigm rewritten in real time. Clerk Senna struck the staff again, and this time her tone held something like satisfaction. Record completed. Mutual claiming under public witness, free consent, equal marking. Binding recognized by tribunal, crown, and moon law. Alexander drew Ophelia into his arms then, not possessive, simply holding. She let herself lean. His mouth brushed her temple, then rested there while her pulse, and his, found the same rhythm. By the third evening after the tribunal, the keep's great chamber was full again, but the atmosphere had changed from spectacle to work. Snowmelt dripped from the gargoyles outside, and petitioners stood in orderly lines beneath new lantern placards that read, Sanctuary Intake. Ophelia sat at the high table beside Alexander, two seals before them, Crownthorn and Moonmark. Mistress Neve stood at the rail in her best dark wool, expression unimpressed by rank as ever. Mara stood at Ophelia's shoulder with ledgers. Senna read each reform text aloud, voice carrying to every bench. Decree 1, Senna said. Restoration right chains abolished in all Crown and Allied territories. Any forced transfer attempt is felony coercion. Ophelia pressed the Moonmark seal into wax. Alexander pressed Crownthorn beside it. Dual authority. Structural, not symbolic. Decree 2. Sanctuary houses funded at Greyfen, Brackenford, South Weir, and Keldmarch, administered by healer councils. Neve accepted the first charter packet, met Ophelia's gaze, and gave a brief nod that carried more feeling than a speech. Decree 3. Cross-pack tribunal chaired by rotating female adjudicators from Shadowfang, North Vale, Stonemere, and River clans formerly barred from vote. Lord Perrin rose from the second bench, pale but composed. "I request statement for record." At Senna's nod, he faced Ophelia. "I used dehumanizing language in prior session. I was wrong. My district will comply with the new protections." "Noted," Ophelia said. "Compliance will be measured by outcomes, not apology." Outside, bells from the river towers answered one another in a new pattern. Two long, one short. Sanctuary signal, not hunt. The same towers that had carried her description now carried routes to safety. At dusk, wardens escorted the last unresolved evidence chest to the archive vault. Forged contracts marked fraud, clipped Ravencrest coins tagged to the broker ring, seizure ledgers from restored granaries, the blood-stiff linen and stolen wolf charm filed under intimidation case closed. The detained messenger signed final testimony and chose resettlement under witness protection in Greyfen. The three raiders took negotiated sentences of labor restitution and public confession against their broker, whose conviction posted at every market gate by morning. When court finally emptied, Ophelia and Alexander walked the upper terrace without escort. Moonlight silvered the slate roofs and thaw-wet stone. Below, in the courtyard, rescued packlings chased one another around a cedar trough while Mara pretended not to smile and failed. Neve argued dosage ratios with the palace physician as if both crowns were irrelevant. Ophelia stopped at the balustrade where wind carried pine and wood smoke from the lower town. Her mark pulsed warm at her neck. His answered at her side. "They searched the kingdom to find me," she said softly. Alexander threaded his fingers through hers. "Now the kingdom knows where to find protection." She turned into him, no hesitation left in the movement, and he kissed her brow with reverence that had survived every battle of law and claw. Below them, the sanctuary bells rang again, clear and steady, and this time the sound felt like home.